I want to start with a scene you already know. You walk into a supermarket, bright lights, clean floors, endless aisles, and you feel that odd modern comfort, abundance. There's food everywhere, or at least everything is called food. And that's the first crack in the wall, the place where the biggest health argument of our time slips in quietly and makes itself at home. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost everything in that building is legally food, but not everything in that building is trying to keep you alive. And before we go deeper, if you like stories like this, where we pull apart big ideas with simple examples, hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps, and it motivates the author to keep publishing more interesting, well-crafted stories like this, especially the ones that take time to research, write, and shape into something worth listening to. Alright, back to it. Most people think health debates are fought with studies, experts, and arguments about data, but a huge amount of the war is won earlier than that, before the first statistic is quoted, before the first panel meets, before the first angry comment thread ignites. It's won in a quieter place, where nobody is looking. It's won with vocabulary, with definitions, because whoever controls the definition controls the border, and whoever controls the border controls what gets sold, what gets promoted, what gets regulated, what gets reimbursed, what gets normalized, and what gets defended with a straight face. Let's take food. In real life, in biology, in the language of the body, food means something like this: what you eat to sustain life, to build and repair tissue, to keep a human functioning. Nourishment. The body doesn't care about branding, the body cares about inputs and outcomes. But in the world of paperwork, policy, commerce, regulation, food can become a broad category, designed less to answer "does this nourish you?" and more to answer what falls under this legal umbrella. That sounds harmless until you realize what broad umbrellas do. They don't discriminate. They don't ask whether something is a good idea. They only ask whether it fits. And once something fits under the umbrella called food, it gains a strange kind of protection. It becomes normal. It becomes something people stop questioning. The conversation shifts from "should humans eat this?" to "how much is okay?" And that is a massive cultural victory. Then comes the second move, the move that makes the first one almost invisible. You teach the public to think of eating as a math problem. Calories in, calories out. Balance, moderation, everything fits. And yes, energy balance matters. Of course it does. But when you reduce the entire meaning of eating to fuel, you quietly remove the hardest question in nutrition. Does this thing build you or does it drain you? Because fuel is neutral, nourishment isn't. A campfire and a house fire both produce heat. Only one belongs in your living room. That shift, food as math, food as calories, food as a neutral unit, creates an environment where a sugar drink and a steak start to look like two versions of the same thing, just different shapes of energy. And once you see the world that way, responsibility evaporates. Real food and fake food can stand side by side and be judged by the same shallow metric. The products don't have to prove they nourish, they only have to prove they can be sold. Now slide one step sideways into another definition that quietly shapes reality: drug. In regulatory language, a drug isn't only what's in a pill bottle. It can also be defined by intention, by what something is marketed to do: diagnose, treat, cure, prevent. That intended use idea matters because it means the words on the label can matter as much as what's in the package. It's partly a consumer protection concept. Don't let people sell miracle cures without evidence, but it also creates a strange incentive landscape. Companies learn to dance right up to the edge of what they're allowed to claim, without crossing the line. They hint, they imply, they use careful language, and the public ends up arguing in the fog, because fog is profitable. Clear air is harder to monetize. And then we arrive at one of the most emotionally charged topics on Earth: vaccines. This is where the definition game stops feeling academic, because it touches trust. When public-facing wording changes, especially during a crisis, people notice. Sometimes those changes are made to simplify or broaden language for communication. Sometimes they're meant to reflect nuance, like the difference between sterilizing immunity and meaningful protection. But whatever the reason, the effect can be the same. People feel like the ground moved under their feet. And when that happens, people start asking questions that aren't really about the exact sentence on a website. They're asking, what else is being worded carefully? What else is a technicality? What else is a category shift disguised as a definition? The important reality, medically, is that vaccines can be safe and effective while still not guaranteeing perfect, permanent immunity for every person against every version of a virus, especially for respiratory viruses that evolve. But the communication side is delicate. If you change phrasing in high-trust areas without explaining the nuance, you don't just change words, you change the temperature of the room. Now zoom out even further. What is health? If you define health as complete physical, mental, and social well-being, it sounds beautiful. It sounds like a poster in a clinic. It also means almost nobody qualifies for very long, because complete well-being is not a stable human state. It's a postcard. Life is stress, life is injury, life is grief, imperfect sleep, bad weeks, anxiety, aging. So if the official idea of health becomes an unreachable mountain, two things happen. People feel broken even when they're normal, and a permanent market appears for endless fixing. Not just medicine, programs, tests, subscriptions, tracking devices, solutions for problems you didn't know you had until someone named them. This is where the story loops back to the supermarket. Because if the system can convince you that food is just fuel and health is a perfection standard, then the modern citizen becomes trapped in an exhausting cycle. Eat whatever is cheap and normal, feel off, try to purchase your way back to complete well-being, fail because the standard is impossible, repeat. No single villain has to twirl a mustache for this cycle to exist. The machine runs on incentives, and incentives live under the floorboards. They live in what gets subsidized, what gets insured, what becomes cheaper, what gets marketed to children, what gets placed at eye level, what gets sold in bulk, what gets rewarded for shelf life instead of nourishment. When an entire agricultural and industrial system makes certain ingredients abundant and inexpensive, those ingredients don't just sit politely on a farm. They become the base material of modern products engineered for profit, convenience, and repeat purchase. Then we tell people, make better choices, while the river is flowing one direction and the average person is trying to swim upstream with a full-time job, tired kids, and a shrinking grocery budget. So when someone says the greatest health scam in history, the smartest version of that claim isn't one secret conspiracy. The smartest version is this: the biggest trick is that we argue about health as if it's just personal behavior, while the system quietly shapes what counts, what is normal, what is cheap, and what is even allowed to be called what. The biggest scam is that definitions built for administrative convenience end up becoming cultural truth. And once a definition becomes cultural truth, it becomes a shield. It becomes a justification. It becomes a way to win the argument before the argument begins. Now, what would fixing this look like? Not a miracle, not a purge, not a single law that saves everyone. More like boring, powerful upgrades. Clearer labeling that helps normal people recognize processing level and not just marketing slogans. Stronger, cleaner rules around health claims so products can't wink at medical promises without evidence. Public communication that respects nuance, especially in high-trust areas, so people aren't left filling silence with fear. And the big one, incentives that make real ingredients easier to buy, not just theoretically available somewhere in a corner of the city if you have time, money, and transportation. But even before policy, there's a personal upgrade you can make right now. And it starts with a question most people don't ask because it sounds too simple. When you eat this, does your body recognize it as building material, or does it treat it like a chemistry problem it has to survive? That question cuts through marketing. It cuts through ideology. It doesn't require you to join a tribe. It asks for one thing: honesty about outcomes. If you take one idea from this entire story, make it this. Reality doesn't change when you rename it, but behavior does. And in a world where policy, profit, and public trust collide, the most powerful weapon is often not a study. It's a sentence, a definition, a quiet line of text that tells you what something counts as. So the next time you hear an endless debate about guidelines, safety, health, or what's healthy, pause and ask the question beneath the argument: what does that word mean in the real world, and what does it mean on paper? Because the gap between those two meanings is where the modern world hides its sharpest edges.